On today's show, Ku Khahil stops by. We're going to continue the Eastern Conference whip around with one final episode. This one, we talk about what the Detroit Pistons should be and whether or not they can be a team that can seriously threaten the Cavs this year. Plus, my thoughts on the Cavs having interest in Malik Beasley. Yeah, very interesting situation there. We'll dive on that, and then we will get to our conversation with Ku Khahil. It's all straight ahead on today's edition of Locked On Cavs.
You are Locked On Cavs, your daily Cleveland Cavaliers podcast.
Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? My name is Danny Cunningham, and you might know me from my time covering the Cleveland Cavaliers, places like my Substack, The Inside Shot, Cleveland Magazine, 92.3 The Fan, and a number of other stops along the way. And I just want to say thank you to you for making Locked On Cavs your first listen today and every day. You can find the show anywhere you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, or anywhere else. Make sure to drop us a 5-star rating, leave us a nice review, and of course, be a friend. Tell a friend about Locked On Cavs. Make sure you're subscribed. Make sure a friend is subscribed as well. And if you're watching the show on YouTube, do us a favor. Hit that thumbs up button for us. Click subscribe. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss the latest Locked On Cavs content. A proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode brought to you by FanDuel. Football season right around the corner. Visit FanDuel today and start planning your futures bets right now. As I mentioned in the open, Ku Khahil going to stop by in just a minute to talk about the Detroit Pistons as we continue the Eastern Conference whip around series that we've got going on over here at Locked On Cavs. But there was a little bit of news, or maybe I don't know if news is the right word, but the Cavs were mentioned yesterday, and I believe Hoops Hyped was the first place to mention the Cavs having interest in Malik Beasley. Now, Beasley, of course, was with the Detroit Pistons last year. He had a fantastic season for Detroit where he was one of the best three-point shooters off the bench ever. He shot 43%. He shot 41% on threes last year on a very high volume, taking 9.3 a game. Was set to sign, from all reporting, a 3-year, $42 million contract with the Detroit Pistons when free agency opened. And then Beasley was put under investigation for being connected to gambling. Obviously, that's a big no-no. We have seen guys be banned for life from this. Jonte Porter obviously comes to mind as somebody that got in trouble. We've seen it happen in baseball more frequently, especially locally here with Luis Ortiz and Emmanuel Clase from the Cleveland Guardians being under their own investigation. So we have seen this rather frequently. But Beasley, over the weekend, according to ESPN's Shams Charania, was essentially cleared that he's not the target of the federal investigation that is ongoing that he previously was connected to. So I don't know if this means exactly that he's been cleared of any or all wrongdoing, but it doesn't seem as if he's the target of the investigation the way that it previously thought he might be. So this opens up him maybe being able to sign with a team. And the Cavs were mentioned as a team that was, quote, keeping an eye on Beasley or had checked in on Malik Beasley. And what have I said all the time about this Cavaliers front office, whether it's been LeBron James, Kevin Durant, other moves they could potentially make? Kobe Altman and his front office are going to always make the call. They're going to check in. They're going to do their due diligence. They have done that time and time again. I think had they not been a front office that routinely does its due diligence, I don't think Donovan Mitchell's here, because Donovan was, Cleveland was never rumored to be in on the Donovan Mitchell sweepstakes, but the Cavs checked in. They did their due diligence and ultimately were able to make a trade for Donovan Mitchell happen. Now, as far as Beasley goes, I believe the Cavs do like Malik Beasley as a basketball player. He's a very good shooter. He's had a lot of success as a shooter in this league. He has bounced around quite a bit, which is a little bit concerning. But he's a player that I do think the Cavs like. Now, do I expect the Cavs to be able to go out there and land Malik Beasley in free agency? I do not. I think that he ultimately is probably going to get more money than the Cavs can offer. So keep in mind, the Cavs right now have 13 guys on NBA standard contracts on the roster. They need to have 14 at most points in the season, and I expect that they will. But they also can only offer the minimum. And that is something that matters when you're having this conversation, because Malik Beasley, as I mentioned earlier, was set to sign a contract worth more than $40 million this offseason. That is not going to happen anymore. I mean, there's just not teams that have cap space. It's because of this. This has kind of been a lost free agency period. So I would expect Beasley to be in a situation where he's only going to want to sign a 1-year deal. But I do think that there are other situations where Beasley could get more money this year than the veteran minimum from the Cavs. Considering the fact too, because it is worth bringing up and it makes this situation much more interesting. Malik Beasley in Detroit lived in a building that was an apartment building, a nice apartment building that was owned by Bedrock, which is one of the companies that Cavs owner Dan Gilbert owns. But you see Bedrock signs in Cleveland because they're very involved in Cleveland's real estate now. And Malik Beasley was evicted from his apartment, and there were a couple of lawsuits with Bedrock suing Malik Beasley. So I don't know if there's precedent in the NBA, and I don't know that this would be a full issue. Like I don't know, and given that he's going to sign a contract with somebody at some point, I would imagine, I think this stuff will get resolved. But I cannot think of another situation in which a free agent signed with a team after there was a lawsuit from a company owned by that team's owner against said player. It's a really interesting situation. It feels a little sticky for the Cavs to be getting into it. I would not anticipate Malik Beasley signing in Cleveland. I don't think it's something that can be ruled out by any stretch of the imagination because, like I said, I do believe the Cavs have interest there. It's just, I don't know that it's going to be the right fit on both sides. Now, if he is the 14th guy on the roster spot, and I've talked pretty frequently this summer about how when you get to that point in the roster, like that is not a player that is deciding a lot of games. That is not a player that is deciding championships for you. Malik Beasley, I'm pretty confident in saying would be the best 14th roster spot in the NBA because he is a good player. He's a very good player. He's a very good shooter. I know there are jokes being made out there that he was cleared of gambling and it's just that he stinks. That's not the case. Like, you know, he can shoot the heck out of the basketball. The fact that he shot 41% from three last year, 41% the year before, just 35 2 years between that. But that was when he was bouncing around a little bit between Utah and Los Angeles. But he's got a pretty strong track record. He's a career 39% three-point shooter on over 6 threes a game. He's got a pretty strong track record as a shooter. And I do think, too, playing alongside the guys that he would be playing alongside in Cleveland would only give him better looks than what he's gotten for most of the time in his career. So I do think it's something that is worth monitoring. I will probably go a little bit more in depth on this situation in tomorrow's edition of Locked On Cavs. And I do want to say, too, my conversation that is about to jump on your screen or come across your podcast with Ku Khahil was recorded the middle of last week. I believe it was last Wednesday. So we had no information about what happened with Malik Beasley this weekend. We did not know that was coming. We were not aware that he was going to be cleared over the weekend. We were certainly not aware that the Cavs were going to have interest in him. So that, just keep in mind that when we mentioned Malik Beasley, this part of the conversation was recorded prior to the news this weekend coming out. So that is straight ahead. A lot we get into. There's the Pistons are a team on the rise. We talk a lot about Cade Cunningham, talk a lot about what they had to do this offseason because Malik Beasley not in the picture anymore in Detroit. So it's a really fun conversation. Ku, I think, does a great job covering the Pistons. And Detroit is a team, I don't think that they're a championship contender right now. I think 2 years from now, maybe they could be. But they're a team that the Cavs are going to see a lot of, obviously 4 times in the regular season. And if the Cavs square off with the Pistons in the playoffs, I don't think anybody should be surprised by that. So straight ahead, my conversation with Ku Khahil. But first, today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. August 26th, officially FanDuel Futures Day, a brand new holiday for football fans who live for bold predictions and preseason hunches. For just 24 hours, FanDuel giving you deals on NFL season predictions. So whether you're calling your MVP, eyeing a long shot division winner, or ready to crown your Super Bowl champ before week 1 even kicks off, this is your moment. There's a lot on FanDuel that you can dive into. Maybe, we talk long shot division winner. Let's head on over to the AFC North. Your Cleveland Browns. Do we think they have a good chance? No. They're plus 3,500 on FanDuel to win the AFC North. Maybe you believe in the Browns. Maybe Flacco fever has you just foaming at the mouth to put that bet down. Maybe you think that they're going to go on the Cinderella run of all Cinderella runs. I don't buy it, but maybe you buy it. FanDuel is the place to go if that's what you want to do. One that I might like, the Denver Broncos, plus 280 to win the AFC West. I think Denver might have the best defense in football. Now, that said, I'm not going to be somebody that bets against Patrick Mahomes, because I certainly am of the belief that Patrick Mahomes is the best quarterback I have ever seen. So I'm probably going to take my money and put that on Kansas City at minus 105, which is not bad value for them to win the division. So again, head on over to FanDuel, because Futures Day is one day and one day only, August 26th. Hey, that is tomorrow, because today is August 25th. So visit the FanDuel app today, or FanDuel.com. That is FanDuel.com. Start planning your futures bets now, because FanDuel Futures Day, one day and one day only. FanDuel, play your game. And welcome back to the podcast, Ku Khahil, who is doing a fantastic job for us here at Locked On, covering the Detroit Pistons through what has been, I think, certainly an eventful summer. There have been some changes, maybe not to the core of the Detroit Pistons, on the edges in ways that needed to be changed. Of course, a few old friends of the Cavs on that team, both on the sideline and on the roster, and a pretty big controversy. So we're going to dive into all of that. But Ku, what has been going on with the Pistons this summer?
Yeah, it hasn't been as noisy as a summer as maybe some fans wanted it to look like after a playoff round against the New York Knicks, where they really had such a great season, almost pushed New York out of the playoffs in that first round. A lot of fans felt like they should have went out and tried to, maybe trade for a star or try to take this big step toward being a contender in an open East. They didn't do that. They kept the core intact and kind of just added along the edges, like you mentioned. So hasn't been as eventful as some fans wanted it to be, but they've made some moves, and they still figured to be better next season. So that's where we're at right now as of, August 20th.
Do you think that they should have been in the market for a big piece? And I know that it's hard to say which big piece would have fit in Detroit, and we don't know what they tried or didn't try to necessarily do. But do you think, Ku, that should have been something they aimed to do this offseason, rather than give this core group another year alongside Cade Cunningham and just change some things on the edges?
Yeah, my opinion and take since the beginning of the offseason was everything should have been on the table. Did they have to go out and get a star? No, but should they have at least looked around, entertained it, see what it looked like? 100%. If they trade for a star, I would have been on board with it. If they decided to run it back with the core and get some more answers and try to just add along the edges, I would have been on board with that either. I feel like they could have went either way and been fine. I would have had a problem if they just went to the offseason and was like, you know what, we're not doing this. We're not even going to look at a star. We're not going to look at upgrading. We're just going to, if that was the case, I would have been pretty upset. But according to rumors, they were interested in guys like Miles Turner, who maybe isn't a star, but is an upgrade at center and provides a different aspect to the Pistons. Guys like maybe a Lauri Markkanen, guys like that. That knowing that they at least showed some interest, or at least maybe not interest, but at least asked around and figured out what it would have looked like. I'm cool with that. If they went on and said, you know, that's not what we want to do right now. We want to kind of give it another year before we make that move. So I was cool with either way. Thought they could be a little bit more aggressive in free agency, but outside of that, I thought they had a fine offseason.
So they did add a number of players, and I want to get to them especially because a couple of them are former members of the Cavs. But the Malik Beasley situation happened just before free agency began. I don't remember the exact date, but I know it was late June, right before the NBA calendar flipped over on July 1st. Obviously, he is unsigned. There's a lot of off the court stuff going on with him. I would be very, very surprised if he's playing in the NBA this year, but he had a fantastic year for Detroit last year, and it seemed as if he was in the plans. I believe they were close to agreeing upon an extension with Beasley prior to the gambling controversy coming out. But how much did that last second, I don't even know what to call it, controversy or scandal, how much did that last second scandal, I guess we'll say, impact Detroit's offseason?
So this actually happened the day before free agency, and from what I understand, the Pistons didn't know this was going to happen. I don't know if they knew that there was some kind of, whether there were whispers about something, but what my understanding is they didn't know that it was going to drop the day before and that they weren't going to come to an agreement. He wasn't going to be able to play. Like, they weren't aware of that. So it was a bit of a bombshell for them. They did have to pivot at the last second, which they did, I think, a decent job of doing. But losing Malik definitely was, hurtful for the Pistons. He had one of the greatest shooting seasons we've seen last year on the type of volume and efficiency he had it on. It was crazy this past year. So they were going to sign him to a 3-year deal with that MLE, right around $14 million. That was basically agreed upon. And obviously they weren't able to do it. They have a roster spot open, and there's been some whispers that they're keeping it open just in case things do get resolved with Malik Beasley, and they can just bring him back into that with a 1-year, like $5 million contract, something around there. But I'm in agreement with you. I don't think it's likely that he's going to play in the NBA this year, especially when you look at Terry Rozier, how long that investigation took. And actually, they reopened it again, I believe, last month. So You never know how long these things are going to take. So I tend to lean towards he's probably not going to play this year for the Pistons. But it definitely was a bit of a bombshell, changed the way they wanted to approach the offseason. I thought Trajan Langdon did a decent job of pivoting at the last second in a situation that he could not have seen coming.
So a couple of the names that Trajan Langdon and the Pistons front office did pivot to, Caris LeVert, who Cavs fans know very, very well, spent a couple of seasons in Cleveland before he was traded to Atlanta at the trade deadline in February as part of the DeAndre Hunter trade. Duncan Robinson was, I believe, a sign and trade in a deal with the Miami Heat that they got. What did you think of the way that Detroit pivoted their offseason plans to acquire some of those guys that can help out around the edges?
Well, I'm a big fan of the Duncan Robinson signing. They needed someone, once they lost Malik Beasley, to be able to replicate some of the movement shooting so they can run some of the same actions and have some of that same gravity within their half court, because Cade played really well off of that. He really loved playing with the level of shooter of Malik Beasley, where you can run these off-ball screens, where you can run these guard-on-guard screens, have him flare off of it, and have that type of gravity with it. So, and that's something that Duncan Robinson's going to be able to do. He's even a better move. He moves without the ball even better than Malik Beasley does. He's a little bit of a better playmaker as well. So I really like the Duncan Robinson sign. They needed that. If they didn't address that, I would have been pretty concerned going into the season. So I really like the Duncan Robinson signing. Defensively, he's not going to be, it is what it is. But offensively, they needed someone that can at least replicate the type of shots that Malik Beasley took, and Duncan Robinson is going to do that. Caris LeVert, I'm not the biggest fan of. I've been wishy-washy with that signing. At the beginning, I was really upset about it. I wasn't a big fan of it at all. I've slowly started to come around to it a little bit. If he can be more of the player he was last year, when he's taking more threes and he's being smarter with the shot selection and he's a more efficient player, then that would be great. He has more size than Dennis Schroeder. He's a better defender than Dennis Schroeder because of that size and that length, and he will be able to allow the Pistons to have some versatility with their lineups because, again, of his size. But my concern is, for 8 years, he was one of the most inefficient scorers in the NBA. And my concern is was last year a fluke? Was last year him changing his game and realizing a better way to play? Or is he going to go back to the player we've seen for the majority of his career, when he's a real inefficient guy, takes a lot of mid-range jumpers, and just something I'm not too big of a fan of? I'm willing to test it out, because last year, if he can be that player from last year, that would be an upgrade for them. But I'm concerned about whether that actually is who he is, or if it was just a one-off.
Now, one of the other guys that is not a new acquisition, but I do think could maybe be viewed as a bit of an addition, is Jaden Ivey. And Ivey, as you know, only played 30 games last year because of a pretty nasty leg injury that he had. But in those 30 games, I did think, at least from afar, and maybe you feel differently, but I thought that he played pretty well. His shooting was certainly up, and he looked like a guy that was taking a significant step forward, in my opinion. Is he viewed coming back, one, as completely fully healthy, like no worries about that, and two, as somebody that they can use as an addition, even though he's not technically a new signing?
Yeah, from everything we understand, he is 100% healthy. He's going to be ready to go. He's good in that department. If you talk with Trajan Langdon, you talk with JB Bickerstaff, you talk with any of them, you ask about additions or what's going to be different about this year, the first thing they bring up over and over and over is Jaden Ivey's back. That is the big addition. Jaden Ivey's going to come back. We didn't have him last year. Like, that's what they've said over and over and over again. So I think they definitely view it as a potential upgrade and potential add to the team. I think there's also And the reason why we haven't seen an extension yet, now we have 2 months until they decide they could come to an agreement on an extension, but I don't think that's probably going to happen. The reason why is I think there's also another side to this where they know that maybe he isn't a long-term fit. So he could be the guy, he could be a really good ad, but there's also the other end of the spectrum where maybe he isn't as big of an ad as they want him to be, and they have to pivot. In a season where they have Jalen Duren and Jaden Ivey up for extension. Next year, you have to talk about Ausar Thompson. Cade Cunningham is now on his extension. That's being kicked in. These things start having to be considered. So we'll see what happens with the contract extension. Jaden Ivey was shooting the ball much better this past year. The concern with Ivey is, one, was it just a 30-game shooting, hot streak from him from beyond the arc? Because everywhere else, his splits remained the same. Shot around the same at the rim, still struggled to finish, still shot the same from floater range, shot the same from mid-range. His turnover percentage actually went higher. So he was around the same player he was last year away from the three-point shooting. Now, the three-point shooting was a great jump, and that would be love to see that shooting. He started to shoot a lot more movement threes as well. That was great to see. Is that something that's going to maintain, or was it just a hot shooting streak? And can he, as an athletic guard, as athletic as he is, can he become a better finisher? Those are the questions he has to answer. And if he's able to do that, I think the Pistons will end up signing him to a contract next offseason. He will be a big addition for this team this season.
More with Ku Khahil in a second, but first, today's show is brought to you by OpenPhone. If you're running a business, you know that every missed call is money left on the table. Think about the last time that you had an urgent need, maybe for a plumber or a service provider. If the first person didn't answer, did you wait? Probably not. You moved on. That's why you need OpenPhone. OpenPhone, the #1 business phone system built to streamline and scale your customer communications, all from an app on your phone or your computer. OpenPhone lets you manage business calls and texts from a single app. Plus, their shared inbox feature is a total game changer because your team can just jump into any conversation instantly without missing a beat. Plus, their AI agent handles after-hours calls, answers common questions, and captures leads so that you never miss a customer. And right now, OpenPhone offering listeners 20% off your first 6 months at openphone.com/LockedOnNBA. Again, that is openphone.com/LockedOnNBA, openphone.com/LockedOnNBA, LOCKEDON NBA. Plus, if you have existing numbers with another service, OpenPhone will port them over at no extra charge. OpenPhone, no missed calls, no missed customers. And the guy that I probably should have asked about sooner, and maybe this is just a classic case of burying the lead, but Cade Cunningham, who I thought was fantastic last season, made third team All-NBA, was an all-star for the first time, received MVP votes for the first time, going into what is year 5 for him. If you want to quibble and say, well, it's actually year 4 because the second year in the league, he only played 12 games and that doesn't necessarily count. Okay, I can listen to that. But what are the expectations for him going into this first season on a brand new big contract?
Yeah, I think the expectations for Cade is to get this team into the playoffs, avoid the play-in, try to fight for a top 5 seed in the Eastern Conference. Orlando made a pretty big jump. I think they'll be higher than the Pistons as of right now, just looking at the roster on paper. And then you got Atlanta Hawks, who made some really good additions. I loved what they did. I think the Atlanta Hawks and the Pistons will be fighting. I think the goal for Cade is to get the Pistons above the Atlanta Hawks, try to get them a top 4, top 5 seed in the Eastern Conference, and compete for a playoff series win. For individually with Cade, cut the turnovers down. High usage guys are always going to turn the ball over. It is what it is, but there's still a line that you can't cross, and Cade often crossed that line a bit too much this past year. No one's saying you have to get down to 1.5 turnovers a game, but maybe not 4 turnovers a game like that. There's a line that you have to, kind of toe there. Cut the turnovers down, be a little bit more consistent with this pull-up shooting. His three-point shooting left him in the playoffs. He shot 18% in the playoffs on threes. In the final game against the New York Knicks, every single one of his threes, I believe 7 of 8 of them were in hedge gap threes off pull-up threes coming off, the screen, the pick and roll, and he just wasn't able to hit any of them. That was something he was able to do at times throughout the regular season, but it was up and down. So become a more consistent pull-up shooter, cut the turnovers down, become a little better of a finisher, turn some of those looks into free throws, become even more efficient. He had his most efficient season this past year. Continue to build on that, and he'll be fine.
So as I look up and down this roster, there's a lot of young talent, right? Cade, obviously in year number 5. Isaiah Stewart just going into year number 6. Marcus Sasser, Ausar Thompson going into year number 3. Jalen Duren, year number 4. Jaden Ivey, of course, going into year number 4 as well. There's a lot of young talent on this team. They won 44 games last year. I think that there is room for them just to take a leap or maybe a jump, maybe not quite a leap, but a jump up the standings a little bit, win close to 50 games and maybe win a playoff series, as you mentioned. Let's say they do win a playoff series this year. For that to happen, Ku, who do you think needs to be, because we know Cade Cunningham is the best player on this roster and there's no discussion there, but who do you think needs to be the second best player on the Detroit Pistons if they win a playoff series this year?
It has to be Ausar Thompson. Ausar Thompson, I think, is clearly the second best player on this team. He has the most impact of anyone outside of Cade Cunningham on this team. He was dropped on this team last year in January, coming off of blood clots, no offseason, no training camp, no preseason. And as soon as he was dropped into the starting lineup, their whole season turned around. They went from the 28th best defense in December to a top 5 defense the rest of the year. Their starting lineup dominated teams. Their starting lineup dominated in the playoffs. They outscored opponents by 7.2 points per 100 possessions with Ausar on the court in the playoffs. They destroyed the Knicks when Ausar Thompson was on the floor. If Ausar Thompson is able to play 30-plus minutes, which it seems like he should be able to do now with no minutes restriction, off-season, with the preseason, all that good stuff, play 30-plus minutes, be there from the get-go, and if he's able to improve his ball handling, something that Trajan Langton spoke a lot about this offseason, improve his ball handling to where they can trust him as a secondary playmaker, as a weak side creator, where they can have him run some pick and rolls and trust his handle enough to utilize his incredible passing, his incredible processing speed, his ability to read the defense, combined with top of the NBA, all defensive caliber defense on the other end, along with athleticism that we maybe have never seen outside of him and his brother. Combine all of that, he proved he was the most impactful player last year without offseason. If he can come into this year with an offseason improved for a full season, Ausar Thompson, it will be Cade. Cade has to lead the way, but if they're going to make that next jump, it will be because Ausar Thompson improved and he became the clear second best player on this team.
Do you think that he needs to become a better shooter to be effective offensively? He doesn't shoot a lot of threes. He's not very good when he does take a lot of them. He's shooting under 20% from his career, and it's not on a high volume. Like I said, it's less than 1.5 a game. But do you think that for him to really become that guy that he needs to become, he's never going to become Duncan Robinson from behind the arc, but does he need to become a respectable shooter, do you think, or does that not matter?
I think the shooting is, for me, out the window. I don't really expect him to ever be a good shooter, and it kind of feels like they're going to work with him on it. They're still going to do that. They're going to, show to the public that they believe in that. But based off some comments from Trajan, it seems like Trajan agrees with me that the ball handling is the biggest area that he has to improve upon, because if he can improve as a ball handler, now you can run him as a point guard like they did in the games where Cade Cunningham didn't play this past year, like against the Sixers, against the Thunder, when he really showcased that ability to get to the paint whenever he wants and make those kickouts, throw ahead passes, kind of like Alonzo Ball light in transition, that kind of stuff. The thing with Ausar is a lot of people who don't watch Ausar a lot, and even some Pistons fans feel this way. A lot of people feel like he has no offensive game. So you kind of just want him to shoot enough in the corner to where he's just nothing on the offensive end. Well, that's not the case with him. He's just not a good shooter. He can throw anything around the rim, he's going to dunk it. He can get to the basket. He's a good lob threat. He's a very good passer. He's a smart cutter. He's a good DHO guy. He's, again, a good passer from the short roll. You can use him in a bunch of different areas because of how talented he is. He's just not a good shooter. So the thing I always say, and I've heard, I believe it was JB or even Trajan, I forget which one it was that said this, but what percentage would Ausar have to get to from the corners where you feel like, okay, he's better used in the corner than in the pick and roll, in DHOs, in the dunker spot? What percentage would he have to get to where that actually is better for the offense than all the other things he does well within the half court? So I think just improving the ball handle is the biggest thing for him, because that really allows Cade to play off ball. You can have Ausar run the show. You can trust him now to drive to the basket. He'll draw more free throws like you saw him do in the final 2 games of the playoffs where he started to become more aggressive. That's the kind of thing you want to see from Ausar, kind of like his brother, Amen. Amen doesn't shoot, but he's so aggressive as a driver, and he has a better handle than Ausar right now, to where it doesn't matter. If Ausar can do that, I think that's the next step for him, taking a leap offensively. And if the jumper ever actually does come around, that would be tremendous. But I think most people feel like that's probably not in his cards.
Well, I think if and I agree. I think most people don't think that's in the cards. If the jumper ever does come around, like the conversation around him, and I think it's the same thing for his brother. Although I do think his brother is more advanced in some of the areas offensively that you mentioned. If the jumper comes around for either of them, like you're talking about first team All NBA type guys, because they are absolute freak athletes. A couple more things I wanted to hit on. As you look at this team, and I know you mentioned some of the goals for Cade that are more team goals for the Pistons as far as the standings go, but what do you think that as the Detroit Pistons sit right now, what do you think the ceiling of this group this year is?
I think the ceiling for this team this year is the semifinals. Maybe a top 4 finish. I think they'll be battling with Atlanta with the 4th seed. I think the top 3 will be you guys, Cleveland, New York, and then Orlando. I think that's the top 3. And then it will be Atlanta and Detroit fighting for that 4th spot. So I think their ceiling is a 4th seed, maybe 50 wins, get to the 2nd round. I think that's what their ceiling is going to be. And I think that would be seen as an incredible success. I know some people will say that their ceiling is the Eastern Conference Finals. I just don't know if I see that, because I think there's 2 clear teams that are at the top of the East. And if they have to run into one of those, I just don't see them being able to beat either of those teams. And then Orlando, I'm just so high on what Orlando did this offseason. So I think their ceiling is the 2nd round. Now, moving into the next year, if they decide to make some moves and really upgrade the roster, now you're really talking like finals. We'll see what happens. But this year, I think it should be around 2nd round.
And then lastly, let's say that the Detroit Pistons back in the middle of June would have fired Trajan Langdon and they would have hired you to run their basketball operations. They obviously didn't do this, but hypothetically, we're going to say that they did. What would you have done differently this offseason?
I would have went really hard after Santi Aldama. I think they needed, I've heard all offseason, I wrote about this over on my Substack, that the Pistons want to see Ron Holland and Ausar Thompson play together. They don't know how much they'll be able to do it, because we'll see how advanced Ron is in his jumper. It looked good in summer league, but we'll see how much it's actually grown. But they want to start playing those 2 together, at least in small samples. And a way to be able to do that is to have a guy that can play stretch 5, where you have some more space when you have 2 guys who aren't really respected as shooters, which is why you heard them interested in a Naz Reid and a Miles Turner and a Santi Aldama. I would have went really hard after Santi Aldama as the option to do that. I would have went after Naz Reid, but it seemed like that wasn't really going to be an option. Miles Turner seemed like maybe it was more of an option than maybe we all believed it was, now that he's not even in Indiana anymore. But Santi Aldama would have been my main priority, because he can play the 4. They need a backup 4 very badly. It seems like they're going to try to play Ausar and Ron at that position to split some minutes to get them both more minutes this year. Neither of them are really 4s. They desperately need a 4, especially if Tobias starts to show his age. Santi can do that. And then you can also sparingly play at the 5 when you want to test out those Ron and Ausar minutes. So that's who I would have really went hard after. I probably wouldn't have made a huge trade this offseason either. I probably would have waited. I would not extend Duren or Ivy this offseason. I would go into the season and wait with both of them. If I had to pick one, I would extend Duren. But if I was the GM, I would not extend either of them right now. I would have really tried hard to sign Santi Aldama. And I would have been cool with that offseason.
Well, Ku, thank you so much for doing this. Thrilled that we know so much more about the Detroit Pistons and what went on a little bit north of Cleveland, Ohio during their summer. Very much appreciate the time, man.
Yes, sir.
Make sure you check out Ku at Locked On Pistons and subscribe to his Substack, because he does truly does a fantastic job covering the Detroit Pistons. Film breakdowns he has there. He's got so much over at Pistons Kudo. So go check that out too while you're checking out Locked On Pistons. Ku, thanks again so much, man.
Appreciate you.
Thank you again for making today's edition of Locked On Cavs your first listen, and thank you for making it your first listen every single day. I appreciate it. You can find the show anywhere you get your podcast, Apple, Spotify, or anywhere else. Of course, you can find us on YouTube as well. If you're watching the show, hit that thumbs up button for us, click subscribe, hit that notification bell so you don't miss the latest Locked On Cavs content. Big thanks to Ku Khahil for taking the time to jump on the show, and thank you to you for making this, as I said, your first listen. I will be back tomorrow talking more about the Cleveland Cavaliers, going to dive more into the Malik Beasley situation and whether or not it is possible for him to be on the Cavs.